How did we get to this Trump win?
Well, I mean, it's a long and sad story that I think historians will be studying for decades, if not centuries. We normalized a sociopath. We normalized a criminal. We became used to a person who has no belief in the rule of law, no belief in democracy, no belief, unless he wins, no belief in anything other than himself. The classic demagogue that the framers thought they were doing away with by the mechanism of the Electoral College. Well, you know, you can't protect. A constitutional system has all sorts of checks and balances, but it can't, at the end of the day, it can't tell a free people not to vote for someone who might take away their freedoms or someone who might take away their democracy or doesn't really, who misleads them and demagogues their way to high office. It's just, it's something that unfortunately has happened in democracies before and in human history, and it's not good. And it's what we're going to see, particularly when you have this individual who not only is unwell psychologically, but deteriorating quite rapidly, as we saw during the campaign. It's not going to turn out very well. And maybe there are voters who have convinced themselves that the price of eggs is, somehow something that Trump will actually be able to fix and restore back to what it was 5 years ago. But they're going to be sorely disappointed.
Well, all the things he is or that he's done or capable of doing, we already know. We've seen it, and Americans made this choice. So, Maria, let's talk about the demographics. Why did we see such a big shift in Latinos going for Trump?
So, Stephanie, we're going to see a lot of responses. Some of it is going to be, you say that it's identity politics. There's a bit of that. Some of them are going to say that it was a turnout problem. That's going to be an issue. But quite frankly, to right now quote Carville, it's the economy, stupid. And I say this very understanding, Stephanie, that we have a roaring economy, especially when we actually benchmark it against the rest of the world. But when you talk to the Latino community who were at the brunt of the pandemic, they were the essential workers. 70% of Latinos are in either construction, hospitality, or farm workers. These are individuals that have never really recuperated. When we talk about, yes, the price of eggs, if you are making $15 an hour and your eggs cost you $6, that's material impact. I can tell you when I was knocking on the doors, whether it was in Nevada or knocking on doors out in the outskirts of Pennsylvania, in Reading, Pennsylvania, people were living in multiple households. You had 2, 3 adults living in an apartment, again, trying to make ends meet. All of them really reminisced with a wish that they had that stimulus check. For someone who has to pay $2,000 in rent, a $600 stimulus check is material. And so I think at the end of the day, when all the dust settles, there was just not an economic message of what was going to change their life if there was a continuation of the Biden administration.
We'll talk more about the economy, but immigration was also a top issue, Maria, and some in Biden's party advised him early on, do not be overly aggressive on the border because it was a humanitarian crisis. Some then tagged him as being soft on immigration. Was there any political upside from Latinos in the stance he took?
I would have encouraged, and I did behind closed doors, Stephanie, and very vocally, that there should have been a very different demarcation of what was happening at the border as an international issue and talk about why we had to address it. And then separately, talk about the undocumented folks that were living in mixed status families. I can tell you when I spent time again in the field and talking to focus groups, everyone was heartbroken. They said one of the reasons why we came out so strongly, whether I was in Arizona or Nevada, so strongly for the Democrats was because they hit this promise that my loved one was going to be safeguarded. My undocumented mother that has been here for 10, 20, 30 years was going to be safeguarded under the Biden administration. And that simply didn't happen. And so absent having any safeguards for their families, they said, you know what, the economy at least is going to be able to move me forward. And I think that what you're going to see when we have these conversations is that you still have 11 million undocumented loved ones here. That is a domestic policy issue, and that has to be completely divorced on what is happening at the border. Did the administration fix the border? Are there less crossings now? Absolutely. But we need to have a holistic Western Hemispheric agenda for Latin America that we have not done in 45 years. And so we are not addressing the root causes. Did Vice President Kamala Harris go down into Central America trying to address this? Absolutely. But there has to be more of a holistic approach.
Dave, let's go back to the economy. For many of us, these last few years, we experienced the biggest spike in inflation we have seen in our adult lives. Given that, was it inevitable that President Biden and his administration were going to take the heat for it?
Stephanie, I can't say I'm surprised by the result on Tuesday because incumbent parties are getting thrown out all over the world. It's remarkable that Kamala came within 2 points in each of these battleground, or in a lot of these battleground states, given that prices are 20% higher than they were 4 years ago. And at the same time, I'm not, what I was surprised by in the result was that the suburbs and women did not come through for Kamala Harris like the polls suggested they might. And when I was watching the returns early on election night, and we were seeing some of the results from rural white areas, Kamala Harris was matching Joe Biden's share of the vote, which I thought was pretty impressive. But what we weren't expecting was the kind of decline in Democratic support in Whole Foods suburbs such as Chester County, Pennsylvania, in Oakland County, Michigan, even in Fairfax County, Virginia, right outside D.C., we saw the Democratic margin go down by 7 points between 2020 and 2024. And what that says is that Kamala Harris's messaging was not effective in attracting soft Republicans and those Nikki Haley voters who were skeptical of Trump. And Kamala Harris may have lost the 2024 election back in 2019 when she ran for the Democratic nomination to Joe Biden's left. Many of those positions wrote Trump's October attack ads, including his ads that criticized her position on that ACLU questionnaire regarding gender reassignment surgeries. She had no really effective rebuttal for that. It is a sincerely held belief, but it's an unpopular one.
So do you think that's it, especially in those areas, Dave? Republicans have launched these culture wars. And what we learned is the majority of our country, where they are culturally, is further to the right.
Well, it's that, but also a Democrat might have been more effective in peeling off some of those supporters with a message of extending Trump's tax cuts, which I know would alienate a number of Democrats. But the messaging that was about the future of democracy and January 6th, Liz Cheney, that type of messaging was preaching to the choir. It was not adding anything on to Kamala Harris's coalition.
George, let's talk about what comes next. Okay, Donald Trump says one of his first priorities upon taking office will be mass deportation, and there's no price tag on it. What are your thoughts?
We'll see how competent he is in trying to do that. I mean, it sounds like something that excites people, but the practicalities of doing it, they're going to be a lot harder than anyone thinks. And his effort to do that, I just think, he's not a competent manager, and to effectuate that it's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be good, and it's not going to make the country better.
Dave, we saw Donald Trump eat into Democrats' lead with young voters, not just young men, but young women. All the way up until Election Day, we thought this election is going to be all about reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, and we did see on specific ballot measures reproductive rights protected. But across the board, it seems like it was the testosterone campaign that won out.
Well, in our battleground state polling, what we had found all along was that the undecided voters, or soft or uncommitted supporters, people who are flirting with third-party candidates, they were disproportionately young, more diverse, and disproportionately, they skewed a little bit more female than the rest of the electorate, which in theory ought to have given upside to Kamala Harris because she does well with those groups, and Democrats do. But they also had very negative views of both candidates. 68% of them said they agreed that that Kamala Harris was too liberal to effectively serve as president. 70% believed that Trump was too erratic and out of control. But by 55 to 26, they trusted Trump more than Harris to rein in costs and bring down inflation. And that is a big reason why we didn't see the gender gap widen in this election like the polls were indicating. If anything, the exit polls suggest that it was about the same or a little bit less than 2020 and 2016.
Maria, what does that tell you? What do Democrats have to do going forward, right? There's been this panic that Donald Trump wants to do away with DE&I. And now perhaps as we look at it and we look at all the young people that voted with him, maybe the answer is many of them are feeling like it went too far.
Stephanie, we did a listening tour in the last 6 weeks leading up to the election on TikTok only. And we were trying to see what were people on the conservative young people side, what were they hearing versus on the more liberal side. On the liberal side, it was all identity. It was beautiful. It was flowers. It was really, it was uplifting. On the Republican TikTok followers there of young people, it was how do you pay your bills? How do you make sure that you can balance a checkbook? How do you make sure that you stretch your money? And it was fascinating because it was through those conversations of pocketbook issues that they started serving them more and more, conservative, more right-wing messaging. And so it was fascinating because there's a whole ecosystem of media that young people are consuming, and they're consuming it at volume. And Democratic operatives, folks have, in the news, we have not figured out how to talk to them in the same way. And if you were to see some of these videos, Stephanie, you would enjoy them because they were clever, they were smart, and they spoke to people's essence of what they were trying to do. When we did surveys back in April of 18 to 29-year-olds in the Latino community, their number one issue was paying rent. 35% of the folks in the past year had to go on government assistance. 22% of them had to get a second job. These are 18 to 29-year-olds trying to make really tough decisions, and the party wasn't giving them enough of the economic message that was, at the end of the day, driving the vote at the end of the day, I believe.